agency of the county, and we're also nationally accredited, a very rare honor accorded not very many county historical societies. We're accredited through the American Alliance of Museums. This is a follow-up, the talk I'm giving tonight, to one 2 years ago, which was also sponsored by the Old House Society. That was held at Oakland School, one of the local buildings designed by the subject today, Arthur A. Richard Dick Williams. This evening I'll provide another overview of Williams, his life and career, and highlight some of his most significant work. Some of this will be old ground covered 2 years ago, but much of it will be entering scarcely charted territory. A couple caveats as always. I'm not an architectural historian. I don't have a background in 20th century architectural history. I'm a community historian, a county historical society librarian. My goal is to get people to think about the past, thinking about it not as an object of study encased in amber, but rather as a messy, living, breathing thing that continually shapes the present and by extension our very selves. A few more caveats, right? I can't possibly cover everything we need to cover this evening regarding Dick Williams. He had his hand in many buildings. We can't bring them all up tonight. Glen and Oakdale Elementary Schools in Normal, Oakland and Centennial Schools in Bloomington, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in Bloomington, and other local projects. We just don't have the time today. This original talk went over an hour and 15 minutes, so I'm down to about 35, 40 minutes now. So I'm going to speak for about that long, and then two owners of Dick Williams' homes were very fortunate. Carl Rood and Jim Neely will each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we will throw it open to questions, not only myself, but Jim and Carl as owners, right, and restorers. Okay. Arthur Richard Williams, although Arthur was mostly always abbreviated and most everyone preferred Dick to the formal Richard. This reads to mother, lots of love, Dick, 1933, taken 1 year after graduating from University High School in Normal. Late in life, Dick Williams would describe himself as an architect, an educator, and an ancient mariner. He designed sailboats, and he loved sailing, and he spent a lot of his time in the Sault Ste. Marie and Mackinac Island area. Born in Evanston, though, 1914, but that same year he was born, his father takes a job at Illinois State Normal University to take a job teaching business education. So the family moves to Normal. As a senior at University High School, Williams was art director for the Clarion, the school's yearbook. Much of this talk comes from delving into the A. Richard Williams papers at the University Archives, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Dick Williams attended the U of I immediately after Normal High School, picking up a bachelor's degree in architecture, and from there it was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a master's in architecture. World War II interrupts his teaching and studies, both in the U.S. and abroad, and then in the fall of 1942, he'll receive a commission as ensign in the Navy, and he'll end up serving in the Pacific Theater. Discharged in the spring of 1946, last serving in Japan. So from the time he is discharged until 1970, nearly a quarter century, he's professor in the School of Architecture, University of Illinois. And for more than half that time, he was director of the school's graduate program of design. Dick Williams' local work was done through the Bloomington architectural firm headed by Edgar E. Lundeen and Dean F. Hilfinger. I was lucky enough to talk to the late Bloomington architect Gene Asbury a few years after I started working here at the museum. Gene passed away back in 2012 at the age of 86. Gene Asbury told me that as a student at the U of I campus, he received encouragement from Dick Williams, one of his professors or instructors, and in 1949, the day after graduating with a degree in architecture, he started at Lundin and Hilfiger, first as a draftsman, and then he would go on to enjoy a long relationship with Dean Hilfiger primarily, but also his former instructor, Dick Williams. According to Gene Asbury, when I talked to him those 20 or so years ago, Dean Hilfiger was the architectural firm's engineer and specifications writer, while Lundin, quote, brought in the work. So he was the guy that was out in the country club trying to make the deals. Dick Williams was not a partner in the firm, but rather served as designer. He was the idea guy for certain projects, certainly not all of them. His job was to paint a picture, if you will, with all the brick and concrete and steel, glass, and wood to come later. That would be the job of Dean Hilfiger and people like Gene Asbury to make Williams' vision a reality structurally and mechanically, right? I'm going to intentionally stay away a little bit from the what I think is a terribly overused term, mid-century modern. We'll stick to the broad umbrella of the old school international style, which developed in Europe and the United States in the 1920s and 1930s, and then would become the dominant expression of Western architecture in the decades after World War II. The most common characteristics of international style, well, to grossly simplify things, right? Rectilinear forms, straight lines, right angles, square, rectangular shapes, but not always, of course, right? Surfaces stripped of ornamentation and decoration, open interior spaces and a weightless quality, sometimes brought about by the use of cantilever construction, glass and steel in combination with usually less visible reinforced concrete, though concrete was often favored, right, as was brick and even wood, the latter especially for homes, right? Dick Williams loved the use of wood in home construction. International style characterized by volume of space as opposed to mass or solidity. What else? Regularity of form to some extent, yet flexibility within that form. Here's a wonderful example. At its best, post-war architecture, right, its goal was to harmonize artistic expression, function, and even technology, and in doing so establish what was supposed to be an austere and disciplined new architecture. That was the lofty idea, right? The kind of the ultimate goal. So here's a partial of a 20 by 30 inch architectural rendering, 1948, of a proposed but never completely realized 6-building babyfold campus at the corner of Linden and Willow Streets in Normal. And seen here are many of the hallmarks of modernism: rectangular forms, surfaces stripped of ornamentation, and glass and steel, right? It's all quite beautiful. Lundin and Hilfiger, architects based in Bloomington. A. Richard Williams, designer, November 6, 1948. Williams was only 2 years into his teaching career at the U of I at the time. Again, he's serving as designer. The 1948 campus plan, though, never made it to the brick and mortar stage, but a second Lundin and Hilfiger plan, again with Williams as the designer, passed muster 2 years later. So a series of buildings were then erected over a decade or more. Ground was broken on the first building, which was the nursery, in June of 1950, and Dick Williams had his hand in just about everything. Randall Hall on the Babyfold campus, demolished this spring, May 2025, one of several lost buildings we will bemoan this evening. Okay, thanks to former registrar, museum registrar, and now volunteer Terry Clemens. Terry, I don't think you're in the audience. Thanks to Terry Clemens and others pointing me in the right direction, and thanks to Ted Fagerberg, who we hope is watching this program from Belgium. That's true, that's where he is. We now know that 29 Norbloom Avenue in the Briarwood neighborhood straddling Bloomington Normal is the work of A. Richard Williams, right? So that's new to me. It might not be new to everybody here, right? This photograph and others we'll see in a minute come courtesy of Ted Fagerberg via email over the last week or so, or even less than a week or so. Again, Ted is in Belgium. He told me this weekend in an email this: 29 Norbloom was commissioned by my parents, designed by Dick Williams, and was built between 1947 and 48. It was my first home, and I moved into it from Brokaw Hospital in February 1949 when he was born. And these photographs are courtesy of Ted, right? So thank you, Ted. Under construction, April 1948. With this and other Dick Williams homes in central Illinois, one can see the emergence of a style and a philosophical approach to architecture and nature that would come to be known as mid-continent modernism. And you really see that philosophy develop in his residential architecture as opposed to his more commercial works. Again, I'm reading from one of Ted's emails, quote, "My father, A.T. Fagerberg, of Fagerberg Paint and Wallpaper fame, local business in Bloomington, was of Swedish extraction. Thus, the design spec for the home was to be Swedish modern, which accounts for the vertical board and batten siding on the house, which is maintenance-free Florida cypress, by the way." And here's Ted's father, the late A.T. Ted Fagerberg, at the centerpiece of the house, the grand fireplace, undated. And there's Dick Williams and Ted Fagerberg. Obviously, they had more than just a business relationship. They were friends. Though Dick Williams lived in Champaign-Urbana, lived in a home he designed himself, frequent visitor here, as we're going to hear in a moment. But this photograph was not taken at 29 Norbloom, Ted tells me. I took this photo in 2020 thinking it was an Orm Evans, another local architect, one of his homes, not knowing. So this is the best contemporary photo I have. A room addition, to my knowledge, has been the most significant alteration to the original floor plan. The home is currently in good hands with the owner who appreciates mid-century modern architecture in this fantastic home and its lot. So, as we travel from the Briarwood neighborhood to Sunset Road, here we come upon our second Dick Williams residence, built in 1948 for Thomas Blackman. He was an engineer with Felmley Dickerson Company, the large local construction company and contractor. Felmley Dickerson also builds this house. Described at the time as a redwood ranch house, trimmed at the time in what was called apple green. Current owner Jim Neely called this, or a later version, Fannie Mae Mint Meltaway Green or something like that. The home was then purchased 2 years later by Otto and Lucille Bike, Otto being from the Bike Candy Company family. Lucille lived to the age of 104, passing away in November 2021. She lived in the home for all but her final stage in her life, and I'm not quite sure when that was. Jim Neely and David Dow, who are with us this evening, have been present owners, I believe, since 2022. And these photographs come from our Pantograph Negatives collection. About 15 years ago, the Pantograph newspaper donated to the museum their entire photo negatives collection, which runs about 4 million photo negatives. But we have just absolute jaw-dropping treasures, such as what we're seeing here. We don't have time to explore, all the architectural features of each Williams work. For our purposes, I think it's enough to stroll through the yard or the living room, figuratively speaking, and take a look at things. So again, this is from that Pantograph set when they profiled the house and Otto and Lucille Bike in 1950, right? The living room, defined by that large elevated limestone fireplace. At the time, the built-in closet beside the fireplace accommodated 6 card tables. That's very mid-century modern. The beautiful living room. Again, Dick Williams' homes very intentionally well-thought spaces, as Jim Neely will put it, or had put it to me, right? The way light and air moves through the home, as most of his residences really is quite spectacular. The kitchen was solid maple, and I learned this Built Well brand cabinetry, right? Built Well being a brand name, and that cabinetry survives today. This is from the multiple listing service, so recent photographs before Jim and David took ownership. So there's your mint green trim. And two rare views of the L-shaped residence with the garage attached via the slatted roof feature. Otto Bike had a stroke, so there was a harmoniously designed back addition was added in 1958, which served as Otto Bike's office and bedroom. And there are more contemporary photos. Current owners worked hard to get the city of Bloomington to designate the residence a local landmark and approve a zoning map amendment to add the S4 Historic Preservation District overlay over the property, right? So an attempt to first recognize and for the future protect not only the home, but the property as well. Mint green has given way to white trim, right? And what the backyard and porch area would look like in 2022 before the current ownership, and roughly what it looks like today. Okay, Dick Williams also designed for Lundeen and Hilfinger a spectacular post-war church, as most of you know, on East Washington Street, one of the community's true architectural treasures. But first, let's take a look at its two predecessor churches. First Methodist of Bloomington, erected in 1875, Gothic Revival style, and then you have Grace Methodist of Bloomington, dedicated 1889, more Romanesque revival, right? Standard brick churches of the latter half of the 19th century, both torn down in 1952 because those congregations were merged into the new Wesley Methodist Church, right? So let's take a look at the church that replaced this, right? International style writ large, rectilinear forms, surfaces stripped of ornamentation and decoration, right? You could call this slide, quote, the history of Western architecture, 1875 to 1950. Because you get many of the grand themes there, all in three quick images. Now, some of you know Wesley United Methodist Church, as it's known today, represents, let us say, a respectful nod to another church, a famed church, nationally and internationally, architecturally speaking. So Lundeen and Hilfinger, designed by Dick Williams, but let's just call it a tribute to a more famous architectural treasure nationally and internationally. So keep your eyes on this Bloomington church as it transforms into what was first known as the Tabernacle Church of Christ, dedicated in 1942. That's in Columbus, Indiana, right, and all their wonderful architecture. So clearly, we have a church which is closely patterned after this work. One of the first churches in the U.S., built in the contemporary architectural style a decade before the one here. It's the work of Finnish architect Eliel Saarinen and his son Eero Saarinen. And there's them side by side. But the open interior spaces of this church are just striking, right? Here we see flexibility of space rather than rigidity. We know architect Gene Asbury completed drawings for several Dick Williams design projects, including Wesley Methodist, Oakland School, and Bloomington Federal. Here's our third local A. Richard Williams designed single-family home in the Twin Cities. At the time when it was finished, built as a 5-room, white brick and redwood home, Dean Hilfinger, supervising architect A. Richard Williams, the designer. Built for and with input from Elizabeth Stein, who you see in the middle photo there, a major figure in the Twin City art scene. For much of the latter half of the 20th century, taught Bloomington High School for 24 years, respected fine art photographer in her own right. Stein worked with Dick Williams to ensure that the house conformed to the natural beauty of the lot. They saved several ash trees in the process. Again, these photos come from our Pantograph photo negatives collection. We have digitized more than 100,000 of the oldest Pantograph negatives and uploaded them onto the Illinois Digital Archives site, which you can search, you can download, you can share, you can print, all free at charge. We're now currently working at the end of 1959. So the oldest Pantograph photo negatives in our collection from the early 1930s to 1959 are nearly completed and searchable on the Illinois Digital Archive site. We're thankful for a $550,000 federal National Archives grant, which is enabling us to do that at the moment, more than $500,000. Again, these are photographs from the period when Elizabeth Stein lived there. The living room is triangularly shaped, again, to save trees. There's the view to the northeast, the window wall with the view of what was then described as the Woodsy Davis addition beyond. So today, that's all single family for the most part homes, right? Unfortunately, the vision that Elizabeth Stein, I think, had for the home and its surrounding area turned out a little bit differently. In the hallway with some of her art and others, and the art of others, and the kitchen. And there is 1008 Monroe Drive today. Photographs taken just a few days ago. It's not too much of an exaggeration to say that the current owner, Carl Rood, rescued what was once what is still one of the most important homes from an architectural perspective in the Twin Cities. Carl has the Lundin and Hilfinger specifications, so he was able to order up newly fabricated aluminum window frames. So his restoration efforts have been first class. And there's the, Carl said, come on in, take some photographs. Original kitchen cabinetry, built-ins, all very mid-century modern, save except for the stove, of course. Lovely built-ins inside and on the porch were preserved. So much like Wesley Methodist was an architectural revolution, especially when looking back at its traditional predecessor, so too for bank buildings during this period, as fortress-like brick and stone would give way to the lightness and transparency of glass. So opened in November 1957, Bloomington Federal Savings and Loan replaced what was an old vaudeville house at this corner lot at East and Washington, an old vaudeville house called the Majestic Theater. Note the curtain wall of glass, that's another hallmark of the international style. And a case could be made that this local modernist gem stands as what I call a provincial mirror to the celebrated, what was once known as the Manufacturer Hanover Bank in Midtown Manhattan, completed in 1954, so just a few years earlier, by a team of architects from the famed Chicago firm of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. When it opened, it was the first major bank building in the U.S. built in the international style. I'm talking about this one. When it lit up at night, it was known as a glass lantern. Again, Lundin and Hilfinger brought Richard Williams aboard, and he would receive the design credit. And what was his design? Large glass panels bracketed with metal trim, running 20 feet from the street level to the roof line. Banks had previously emphasized security, but in the post-war years, financial institutions began to pivot to transparency and providing services and being more friendly and open. Now here I am just showing off some of our gems in our climate-controlled archives, because how could I not show off an image like this? Again, another incredible Pantograph photo negative. So the Pantograph staff was covering the opening of this financial institution, Savings and Loan, in late 1957, and they're taking photographs of the grand lobby. I don't know if that's a bank executive or Dick Williams or somebody else. It's kind of hard to tell. And there's a companion photograph. Is that not lovely or what? Another splendidly gratuitous view. Note the general male-female division in labor. How could you not note that, right? And as Jim Neely knows, and he agrees with me, we just love the use of the Bloomington Federal Savings and Loan glass lantern building, and so it became kind of the icon for the bank itself, and you see it in all kinds of things. Stationery or letterhead, matchbook covers. These are all in our archive collections, without the matches, of course. And an advertisement in the Pantograph as late as the early 1970s. In the decades that followed, Bloomington Federal, later Champion Federal, made several additions to the original glass lantern. And in 1980, work began on an addition to the south. So the minimalism of the original box is merely a corner, albeit still a graceful corner, to a much larger complex. And this complex, get ahead of myself, reopened in 2004 as office space for the County of McLean and the City of Bloomington. We call it the Government Center. The old lobby retains much of its modernist grandeur, and who do we have to thank for that? Eugene Asbury, the architect who started it at Lundin and Hilfinger back in the late 1940s. One of his last major projects was getting this right? As a reminder, to all of us and to myself, that the local story of post-war architecture is not merely the story of Dick Williams and Lundin and Hilfinger. There was, for example, a second firm of similar stature and body of work, Archie N. Schaefer and Philip Hooton. Schaefer and Hooton, later Schaefer and Harold B. Wilson, Schaefer and Wilson, and then Schaefer, Wilson, and Evans. Here is Schaefer and Wilson's proposal for that same lot corner that Dick Williams' Bloomington Federal will go up. So another daring international style building by a different architectural firm we just don't have time today to grapple with. And here's another Schaefer-Wilson project, this time with Orm Evans, another important architect as well. In April of this year, with Illinois Wesleyan about to tear this office building down, Museum Executive Director Emeritus Greg Coos wrote up a detailed report on its architecture, the changes made over time, and its unnecessary demolition. Greg wrote, quote, and I'm just quoting from Greg Coos here, quote, "The building was in excellent condition at the time of its demolition. It retained much of its unique architectural integrity. The demolition of this represents the waste of creativity, energy, and the skills and commitment of those who built it. The embodied energy value of its construction has been thrown away." And what replaced this neglected, nearly forgotten modernist gem do we even need to say? About 14 parking spaces, right? Arthur Pillsbury, right? The great Arthur Pillsbury, we all pay homage to. Here's his 1917 Bloomington High School, called playfully, I think, Collegiate Gothic for Gothic Revival. There's an aerial photograph of the old high school, right? So from the confines of the urban grid and the congested older neighborhoods to the open spaces and suburban-like settings of the modern school campus, right? To a 40-acre site. Both Lundin and Hilfinger and Schaefer, Wilson, and Evans were involved in the development of this new high school. In addition, yes, our good friend A. Richard Dick Williams served as the project's lead designer. So when it opened in 1959, Bloomington High School was an exemplar, right, of the international style architecture. Many of its design elements, flat roof, large expansive windows, metal casements, slender columns, absence of embellishments, all hallmarks of mid-century modernism. This is the program that I found in the Williams papers at the U of I archives. I could have put this photo up, I think, and walked away and gone home, and I think it still would have been a super successful program, right? Because I think this one photograph in many ways encapsulates many of the principles we've been talking about today. So you see Dick Williams' vision for a public high school, right, in 1959, right here. And even the cafeteria, and the gymnasium and the pool, right, letting the light in, the airiness of everything. Perhaps the most striking feature remains the gymnasium's scalloped cantilever trusses extending from the east and west walls. And the high school still looks good today, but those lampposts are just awful, aren't they? But for safety reasons, I understand why they're there. That was the view from Locust Street we once had, right? And that was the intention of Dick Williams and his team of architects, right? But that's the view today, because the South Gymnasium of the Athletic Sports Complex, which this opened in 1970, I'm calling it a dumb brick rectangle, right? That's a conspicuous mismatch, if there ever was one, to Dick Williams' airy modernism, right? This completely obstructs the view of, right, what was supposed to be just kind of a splendid idea. One of the editors for this 1964 publication, George Barford, was a professor of art at Illinois State University, and he long held an interest in modern architecture, but it became more of an academic pursuit after he took part of an architecture tour led by Dick Williams, right, of modern and international hallmarks in places like Racine, Wisconsin, and Detroit, Michigan, right, that really hooked George Barford into international style architecture. So this book that I'm showing here, this guide, has photographs of Dick Williams' home in Champaign, Urbana, and as I alluded to, he coined the expression mid-continent modern to describe landscapes and living spaces around that, quote, freshwater world, our Great Lakes and the prairies at the center of North America. So what are the architectural underpinnings of mid-continent modern? Quote, minimalist simplicity, functional pragmatism, and unaffected modesty. If it was only that easy, right? It's an architecture which is modern in its disposition, yet connected to the natural world, and is in a dialogue with the vernacular, the more homespun, right? These photos were taken by George Barford. So as we wrap up here, back in 1964, George Barford, he also designed the Illinois Sesquicentennial stamp in 1968. It's one of my favorite stamps. But back in 1964, George Barford produced a 23-minute color film titled, quote, Design for Living. And in this, he featured 2 Dick Williams designed homes in Bloomington. So 1964 educational film on modern architecture, 2 Dick Williams homes. One was 1008 Monroe Drive, we've already seen that, and the other was 44 Country Club Place. What's that? 44 Country Club Place, yes. 44 Country Club Place. It was finished in 1956, designed by Dick Williams for Lundin and Hilfiger. Dean Hilfiger was the supervising architect. It was built for local businessman Russell Proctor and his wife Trunetta. It featured a stunning curtain wall of glass, which we cannot see, on the west facade, the side facing the golf course. A pantograph notice in May 20th, 1956 had this to say, quote, "Friends of the Russell Proctors have been sightseeing in the new home at 44 Country Club Place. One doesn't quite know whether one is inside or outside the glass-encased house." So, kind of neat. The house was walled inside in cherry and Chicago common brick. The floors were brick as well. These photographs, again, coming from the Pantograph Photo Negatives collection. And that's Trunetta Proctor posing for the Pantograph. The house was laid out, as we can kind of see here, as a circle within a square. One half of the circle served as the kitchen, and the other half was split into two pie-shaped bathrooms, both with skylights. All the mechanicals were hidden within the center column of the vertically laid center column of vertically laid Chicago common red brick, which we can see behind us. Russell and Trunetta Proctor would divorce and sell the house to who? To Dean Hilfiger. The Hilfiger family moved in a week before the JFK assassination, so that would be November 1963. In August of this year, so just a month or two ago, I talked over the phone with Dean Hilfinger's daughter, Charmin Hilfiger. Charmin, right? She was then living in Palo Alto, California, and was a retired playwright, active in local theater, but she was getting ready to move to Argentina. So evidently, if you've lived in a Dick Williams home as a child, you will end up living outside of the United States, because we had that with Ted Fagerberg as well. Charmin was born in 1950, raised in Bloomington, attended Bloomington High. Dick Williams and her father met at the University of Illinois. So I talked to Charmin about Williams and her growing up at 44 Country Club Place. Dick Williams was very much a part of the Hilfiger family when she was growing up, she told me. He was known as Uncle Dick. He didn't have children of his own, so he doted on Dean Hilfinger's children. Charmin remembers Dick being very stylish. He was a world traveler. From her perspective, it looked like he lived a very glamorous life, and he did travel internationally, right? He, quote, always went at design from a philosophical point of view, she said, asking questions such as, what does the space mean, and how will this space be used? Right? Simple questions that really never have a complete answer. And then I'm quoting Charmin here. Glass all the way around is how she remembered this house. Floor to ceiling. It was a glass house. Transparency throughout. Beautiful and unusual. I was extremely proud of it. So in 2005, half of 44 Country Club Place, the lot was deeded to one party, and the other half of the lot was deeded to a second party, and then the latter party acquired the entire lot, and some point shortly thereafter, 44 Country Club Place, the residence was razed, was torn down, and the lot remains empty today. After A. Richard Williams retired to become a professor of architecture emeritus at the U of I, he remained active with ongoing building and urban planning projects. Locally, he influenced the work of important blooming architects. I've talked about Eugene Asbury. Williams spent the last 3 decades of his long life in Tucson, Arizona. The internationally known and respected architect, as he was quoted in his obituary, passed away in 2016 at the age of 101. In 2012, 4 years before his death, he wrote a one-page essay or manifesto, which I found in his papers at the U of I. And he entitled this one-page essay or manifesto as the inauguration of a new golden age. And he says, quote, "I have a vision to build a new infrastructure to foster land conservation and historic preservation, to reawaken a Thoreau-like respect and joy in nature, in austerity to find grace and beauty in simple things, to welcome the fresh principles of modernity in a world of design, landscape, and architecture, in rejection of copycat revivalism, and to awaken a new vision of education, research, and technology, all foretelling fulfillment of the American dream." So thank you so much. You've been a generous and patient audience, but there is more. Before we get to our two Dick Williams homeowners, mark your calendars. Many of you may not know this. October 3, 2026, there's going to be a mid-century modernist home tour. Accompanying events will include a panel discussion, a curated McLean County Center art show, and performance by the Bloomington Normal Symphony. That's all October 3, details to follow. So now reflections by Jim Neely, first of 33 Sunset. Each is going to take about 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Nice work. Hello, hello. Thank you to the Old House Society for organizing this evening's event. Kudos to everyone involved in that. Thank you to the McLean County Museum of History for hosting tonight's talk in this beautiful, beautiful room. And a big thank you to Bill Kemp for his second talk about Richard Williams, a topic that is of particular interest to me and my partner. And finally, thanks for the opportunity to speak about living in a Richard Williams home. As a local growing up here in the 1950s, I was always intrigued by Sunset Road. This hidden, narrow, winding road with no sidewalks or curbs, no street lights, and the natural-looking landscape fascinated me. And I remember clearly asking my mom to drive down the road so I could see that dark brown house with the mint green trim. The exterior color scheme reminded me of Fannie Mae's mint meltaways. The house with the eclectic, eccentric green trim was Otto and Lucille Bike's home, and is the one we live in today. The home was solidly built, and very little had changed since the early 50s. This is exactly what my partner and I wanted: an original, mid-century modernist, architect-designed home that had not been tampered with, on a beautiful lot on a beautiful road. We agreed that our plan would be one of preservation and restoration, and not a gut remodel. When architect Richard Williams designed the house, he thought about its connection to the landscape and the lot. He wanted the house to recede and to blend into its natural setting. He thought about the sweeping south-facing views. Williams thought about the way light and air move through the home. He thought about the layout of the rooms and how each space had a specific function. He carefully considered the way that people lived and entertained. Two features that manifest these considerations were his inclusion of soaring Indiana limestone fireplace, which is at the heart of the living room. Contrary to current trends, the dining room and kitchen are close by, but are not open to each other. Williams, clearly not a maximalist, designed this home to be very pure and simple with no superfluous details. For example, there are no applied door or window trims or casings. Instead, a simple, smooth plaster radius profile outlines these openings. Another feature is the counter height windows over the kitchen sink facing Sunset Road that allow us to keep an eye on the dog walkers, bike riders, and the beauty of the changing seasons. As we watch the world go by, right in front of us as we're washing dishes, we laughingly remember Gladys Kravitz, the inquisitive neighbor lady from the TV series Bewitched, when we stand at our kitchen windows. We made a deliberate decision to preserve as many of the original features as possible. Beautiful, sturdy, minimalist design, original solid maple cabinets that had been painted many times over the years were stripped and professionally relacquered. Wide plank pine and oak floors were refinished, 26 rotting Anderson windows replaced with the same style, same size openings, and the same functionality as the 1948 originals. It was a tough decision to change the exterior trim color from mint melt-away green to pure white. But this is our home. It is not a museum. It is a living, breathing place that we feel is just as relevant, simple, and yet elegant today as it was when Otto and Lucille Byte moved into their home in 1950. When you live in a 75-year-old home, you not only learn to accept the imperfections, but you embrace them and you give those quirks a big, fat hug. As fans of the mid-century modernist aesthetic and believers in the preservation of important buildings in our community, we applied for and received landmark status, or landmark designation by the McLean County Historic Preservation Commission, both for the home and for the landscape. And just as a side, small shout out, Mr. Coos, who's with us this evening, was very, very helpful in sort of demystifying that process and helping us walk through that slightly laborious process. We feel fortunate to be the current custodians of this home and to be part of the fabric of the Sunset Road community. And that's it.
Thank you, Bill and Jim. The more I hear about Richard Williams, I realize how lucky I am to be living in the house that I live in. A little side note about Elizabeth Stein. She lived in a garret apartment when she first moved here in the 40s, and she lived there several years, and at some point she decided to build a home. And I really think she built the home for entertaining, because the layout on the blueprint says 1 bedroom, 1 study, 1 utility room. It doesn't say 2 bedrooms, doesn't say 3 bedrooms. And so the living room itself, when I looked at old photos, every surface had at least 2 ashtrays on it. And the guy that blew out my vents when I first bought the house said he had never seen a living room with 6 return vents. So obviously everyone smoked, and she probably entertained there because she was, not only a high school teacher, but a photographer. So I first saw the house in August of 2020 when I came down to Bloomington for the first time. And my impression of it was, it looked low slung. It had these really small slit windows that were vinyl, and the whole thing was shrouded with foliage, and it seemed like it was taking its last breath. And then 4 years later, it came on the market, advertised as a tutu, and I bought it. And currently, I'm living alone, and the study is now a study again, and the utility room I'm using as a utility room. So, but in any case, I bought it a year ago in June, and in my naivete, I really thought I could have it totally done in like 6 months. Well, I'm now embarking on the 2nd year, and the old adage, that construction building adage of twice as long, 3 times as much, is true. So, but anyway, as Jim just said, I'm not renovating a house, I'm restoring a house. The house had a lot of original features, even though it went through 2 periods, 2 owners that I charitably will say, they suffered from benign neglect. They luckily didn't rip out they didn't rip out the fixtures and didn't rip out my St. Charles stainless kitchen cabinets. And so I was left with great bones. And so that's what I approached the project with. So, but once again, I'm restoring it, and I'm hoping that whatever I do and my brand new roof will keep that home going for another generation or two. And I made a list of things that I've done on the house, and it's not even the complete list. And I say I have done, and I've done nothing but write checks. I'm surrounded by professionals who really do incredible work, and I'm really appreciative of what they've done. So I had all the slate floors, and the slate floors are inside, outside at the entranceway, underneath the cantilevered roof, and the back porch. They've been regrouted. Some of the stones have been flipped around. We were lucky enough to find one of the pieces of slate buried in the backyard, and we needed it to fill in the front. And so that was pretty helpful. I had lots of tuck pointing. I had a garden rebuilt, and in the garden in the back of the house, it's a sunken garden, and I had a whole wall replaced, tuck pointed. It's pretty extensive. It's pretty spectacular. The cabinets in the kitchen, they're St. Charles. They were like the Bentley of cabinets in the probably late 20s up and through the late 50s. And I had a firm come down from Chicago, and they electrostatically painted them. And when they were first put in 53, the color guide for St. Charles cabinets offered 8 possibilities of color. And they originally were gray, but the paint was wearing off, and I picked another color, and that's what I have currently. And they came out really great. I have inserts for a potato insert, an onion insert, and in back there was a big thing, and I figured it was bread, but the brochure says it's bread and cake, and which I kind of like the way that sounds. The exterior of the house was painted brown. It's brick and redwood and steel, and the steel came from Granite City, Illinois. And but in any case, the exterior is painted brown, and we discovered that underneath it is redwood, and the redwood is now, the paint's off of it. It looks phenomenal. And the whole east side of the house facing Walker Drive is painted brown, and that's going to be a project for next year. And in any case, here's the contrast. That's over there is done on the outside. This is the interior. They painted the brown on the interior too. And so that will be stripped in the next year. So I also recently had the bench and grill in front replaced. The bench is a bench outside the front door, and the grill is vertical slats, and that's what the architect called it. It used to be redwood. Over 72 years, there's been termite damage, so we replaced it with white oak, and the white oak a lot of it came from behind the Farm and Fleet area, and it was in a kiln for 3 months around Fairbury, and once it came out, it's been stained, and it finally was put in this week, and it looks spectacular. And of course, the windows that you've all seen. And the windows, there's ups and downs when you do projects. And the windows took 3 months to get, and they were custom designed, and they're made, the architecture firms in Connecticut, they manufacture in Tucson, Arizona. The intermediary firm is in Mokina, Illinois, who were just handling the money and doing the shipping. Well, the windows came, they were installed, and they didn't open. And what had happened was, we discovered that they didn't follow specs in 2 cases, the architectural specs. Additionally, we suspect that some of the arms that open the windows were not the proper length. So, as I said, it took 3 months to get them. They apologized. They remanufactured all 5 windows in about 3 weeks, which was remarkable. And they're incredible. They open, they're installed, and they look really good. So, the last thing I want to mention, there's certainly other things. I mean, I have an enormous bay of windows in the back, or a wall of windows, and it's 30 feet of windows. And the person that lived there previously had a cat and a dog, and they didn't really go out very often, and the cat was not declawed. And I have a curved wall in my dining room, and first he cut a plastic doggy door into the wall, into the door, and then the two pets sort of had the house to roam around, and the cat totally climbed all the drapes and ruined them. So I was left with a wall with nothing, or windows with nothing. So I've had drapes made, and they're spectacular, and you can see them in the picture, I think, but they're incredible drapes, and I'm very happy I have them. So finally, you know, when I go to bed at night, I look around, and the place is so beautiful. I fully appreciate it all the time. And that's about all I can say. You know, this is truly a labor of love, and I'm glad it's mine. Thank you. And now we have Q&A. Does anyone have a question for Jim or Bill or myself?
I have a question for Bill. Did you say Glenn and Oakdale School as well as Oakland were his design? Okay. All right. Well, I opened Glenn School, 4th grade.
So as you know, Glenn and Oakdale are twin schools, very similar. Yes, that's Dean Hilfinger and Dick Williams again, and also Oakland School as well. So,
We also shared the principal. He was in the morning at Glenn and the afternoon at Oakdale.
Interesting. Any other comments, questions? Yes.
I just want to go back to the 50s. I was a member of Psi Upsilon fraternity at the University of Illinois, and he was there on the faculty. And so I was in that beautiful home. Every year, he would bring the seniors from our house over for luncheon in that beautiful house. And I still remember how stunning it was in this very ordinary neighborhood, small lot. This thing just stood out like a beacon. So I have fond memories of the house and of him.
No.
Well, I've got 2 or 3 memories from my childhood. So I'm a couple years younger than Sharman Hilfinger, and I used to go over to their house, and I played in the orchestra with Sharman, and she and I would practice our violin lessons over at her house. And then when I joined the Bloomington Normal Swim Club when I was 12, I had to go over there, and Mrs. Hilfinger interviewed me. I was 12 years old, and I just wanted to join the Bloomington Normal Swim Club. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, when I was a boy, a busload of people would come from Chicago once a month, and they would tour Wesley Methodist Church, and they would tour Bloomington High School, and they would tour Oakland School. Now, I don't know if they went any other places, but I distinctly remember once a month tour buses from Chicago would come down here. This was like 1960, 61, 62, 63. Oh, and one more thing. Miss Stein used to have a lot of her students over to her house.
Thank you.
Yeah, do we happen to know the address of the home in Champaign?
I think it's easy to find. And was it Carl or Jim, were you part of the tour?
But it was not his home that was on this most recent.
So,
One of his homes he designed, but it wasn't his personal home.
so the Champaign County Historical Society or Museum just staged several months ago a mid-century modern house tour. Dick Williams' home was on the tour, but not his home itself. But I think it's pretty easy to get the address. Yeah. Okay. Just talk to Guy. I'll give you a drive there tomorrow. You guys can head out there tomorrow. Oh. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any kind of question? Or one moment.
Are there any other buildings in Bloomington, McLean County, that are at risk of being razed? Mid-century modern, Williams, or other architects that you know
Yes,
about?
I'm sure there are. Greg, can you think of any post-war buildings of significance that are in danger at the moment?
Not at this point in time. Typically,
There's been some significant losses, as I talked about, but I didn't mention, because we don't have time, I mean, this could be the first of 8-part program. Atkin Colby and Hamilton Witt at Illinois State University. Those were just jaw-droppingly beautiful mid-century residence halls that were torn down more than a decade ago. So that was a major loss.
I have a question for Jim. I have not driven down Sunset Road in a number of years because I've moved to Champaign. Can you estimate how many of the homes are original and how many have been torn down and replaced by you-know-what?
I'd say that there are probably 6 or 8 homes that have been raised to build the big trophy homes on the road. And not all of those were mid-century modern homes. I know of one at the very west end of the road that was a pretty beautiful mid-century modern home. And interestingly enough, the neighbor who raised that home and built a very, very, very large home there referred to the home as a chicken coop. So there you go. But I would say 6 to 8 have been raised on the road.
In the city of Bloomington, any house or building that is over 50 years old or larger than 50 square feet has to have a review by the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission. Now, that review can only delay, but it does provide public notice. And so following if you're interested in what's coming down in Bloomington, then you can get the City of Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission agendas, which are online on the city website. The city itself does not respect that. They've torn down some, just recently, a 1888 brick horse barn that was built for Percheron brewery horses at Highland Golf Cars. I would say right now, perhaps the most endangered mid-century modern building in Bloomington is probably Bloomington City Hall, which is a remarkable structure, and I don't think they really understand how good of a building it is.
And the current Bloomington City Hall is Lundin and Hilfinger and a Dick Williams building, another building we didn't have time to talk about today. Yes. Question right there, and this might be the last question. The museum closes at 8 o'clock.
To answer the question, what other buildings in Bloomington, McLean County might be endangered from the period? St. Joseph Catholic Church in Colfax at 107 West North was by Jack Sherman Baker, a colleague of Williams,
Yes.
fellow professor, and I'm not sure how long it might remain standing.
That's been vacant for a while.
It has.
And that's one of my favorite church buildings in all of the county. Gorgeous. Okay. Oh, go ahead. Say.
On behalf of the Old House Society, we'd like to thank Bill, Jim, and all of you for attending, and have a great evening.
Oh. Oh, you did a great job, Carl. Really, that was so, I mean,